On today's Toy Spot, why we're having a look at the NECA Terminator 2 T-1000 Liquid Nitrogen. Depicted in the final scenes, or one of the few final scenes of Terminator 2, where the T-1000 has pursued the T-800, or I guess the T-850 and John Connor to the steel mill and has now been doused in liquid nitrogen. Followed, of course, by Arnie, his famous scene, Hasta la Vista. Shattering does follow. Probably just a case where NECA found another reason to reuse their molds. The Terminator are, I hate to say, somewhat notorious for reused molds. That and Predator figures, they really have gotten a lot of mileage from these figures. You'll see on the top left corner, or the left side of the package, you'll see a picture of Arnie with his gun there. 20th anniversary as well, T2, I had no idea. On the back of the package, the specs, the T-1000 liquid nitrogen, and it says a more advanced Terminator composed of mimic tech polyalloy, a liquid metal that allows it to take the shape and appearance of anyone or anything it touches. Pursuing our heroes from Cyberdyne Systems to a factory steel mill, the T-1000 becomes frozen solid by liquid nitrogen from a ruptured tanker truck. The T-800 shatters, oh did I say T-850? The T-800 shatters the T-1000 with a gunshot, but the fragments soon meld back together again so the T-1000 can resume its mission. Other figures that you can get from this line, there's the Battle Across Time Terminator, there's the Endoskeleton, and of course liquid nitrogen. Which, this is actually interesting that these two are paired on the packaging, whereas the Kyle Reese that was sold in this set did actually not feature the Battle Across Time, and did actually feature the T-1000, or I'm pretty sure it did feature the T-1000. So, at any rate, what I am going to do is take a break, going to get this opened up, and when we come back, we're going to get a better look at the T-1000 liquid nitrogen. Stay tuned. And just before we resume this review, actually one thing that Spot realized when he was looking at the packaging of the Kyle Reese was obviously Kyle Reese was not featured on the packaging in this because he was from the respected Terminator packaging and therefore had Terminator 1 inspired figures. Of course, T-1000 here came from Terminator 2, so of course Terminator 2 figures would be on the back. I don't know why I felt the need to mention that. Anyways, the one accessory, and I'm just going to put the T-1000 down because he does not stand. The one accessory that comes with the T-1000 liquid nitrogen version, excuse me, is actually a pistol, just a little hand gun. That's it. Having a look at the actual figure, it's not bad. It has some issues, which we'll discuss together. On a sculpt level, it of course reuses the motorcycle T-1000 figure. They've just simply painted over him in a almost a bluish, a metallic bluish paint. Whereas the helmet, the face, as well as the hands are slightly lighter than the rest of his body, which is a darker coloring. You can still see his badge is also a silver. And even the patch on the side, Los Angeles Police, is also a lighter color. Now, aside from the paint, aside from just the straight out blue metallic paint that they've put on him, he also has all these little flecks of white. All these little flecks of, they're actually just chunks. You can actually run your finger across them and they're textured. The only problem with this, and it's all over his face, it's on his helmet as well, rubbing your hand against it at any given point, it actually comes off. You can't see it, but I've actually already got a pile of it already on my backdrop where this paint has flecked off. Suppose they wanted to give a textural feel to that paint, and that's just simply add it to the overall paint that they've already put on it. But the problem with this kind of fleck is it does come off, which you can't see on my hand, but assure you it is all over my set. I wish I had my other motorcycle T-1000 figure that I could use the comparison, but essentially it is the exact same figure. I'm wondering, again, for how often we've gotten figures. T-1000, we've gotten a dozen of them. Maybe not, Spot might be exaggerating, but we haven't gotten that many. But we have gotten a lot of them. I think the only one we really still have not gotten of the T-1000, and I don't even know if it's likely we'll get him, is a motorcycle helmet T-1000 from when he enters into the helicopter, where that brief moment of time he was all liquid metal and then he kind of pulls in and then he reforms and he looks over the guy and he goes, "Get out." I suppose I could easily have done that figure too, and maybe future lines of Terminator figures we might get that version of the motorcycle T-1000. Some figures I think aren't really necessary. This particular figure, surprisingly, I think is a nice addition. And I don't say that because it's a bad figure. It's not a bad figure at all. But as repaints go, some repaints aren't really necessary, while others make some sense. In the case of the T-1000 liquid nitrogen version, I think it's a figure that makes sense. Sure, it is simply a reused mold that we've gotten in the past, and sure, it likely is a mold that we're going to get again, but at least it's a figure that if you have the T-800, mildly battle damaged, you could have him pointing the gun at the T-1000 here just before uttering those magic words, those sweet, sweet magic words. That is a nice little diorama, even having the T-1000 kind of stumbling up, even though his articulation isn't the greatest, but kind of just have him here and have like the T-800 here. That would be kind of neat to have on a display. I suppose I really don't necessarily need to talk too much about the detail. I mean, on a likeness level, I think it looks like Robert Patrick. I almost feel like it looks more like him with this repaint than I felt like it did with the initial release of this exact same figure. Perhaps it's just a flesh color. I thought like the other one looked a little too skinny in the face. This one seems to work just well, again, even though it's using the same exact mold. And he's got a much baggier jacket going on there. His belt, the holster area where you can put the handgun into his hand, although truth be told, it would lose some aesthetic if you had a regular handgun inside the holster of the T-1000 who is now completely frozen. This would look a little out of place, but you can do that. You can also have him holding it, but that would probably not make some sense either. In the way of his articulation, now unfortunately this is one of the problems with the Terminator figs. You can see that the T-1000 is leaned forward. His legs are pre-posed, his one leg is bent, his other leg is straight. This is carried over with all the T-1000 figures. I think there might have been one that was a little bit different, but they all have shared this exact same sculpt. This one I think works the best, or one of the best, with this pose, just because the way he comes out of the liquid nitrogen kind of has this very similar sculpt and pose to him. But in the way of his articulation, though, the T-1000, his head is on a very, very rewarding ball joint, so you can get a lot of movement out of his head. His arms are on a pin and socket, although very, very stiff to move. This one I can get to move slightly. There we go. He has a bend in the elbow. He has a rotation in the forearm. Looks like a ball-jointed hand. He's got a swivel in the waist. And then when it gets down to the legs, it's pretty much just a swivel in the boot, but then he does also have a bend in the knees. The bend in the knees is almost a useless point of articulation on this existing figure. Because the knees are so far down, right by where his boots are already bent in a certain way that you're really not going to move him any more than probably what you're doing right now. Once you get him in a spot that actually gets him to stand and not topple over, you're not likely going to be doing any more movement from that. I mean, his legs really hinder any sort of movement to the knees. So I almost feel like the knees, aside from just adjusting where you can get that proper stance out of him, the knees don't serve any other purpose aside from that. Also, as a side note, he's still got the liquid metal heel where he's emerging from the floor. This has carried over with, again, pretty much all the T-1000 figures, and I'm surprised that they just simply didn't paint this the same color as the boot. I don't know. I think overall the figure works well, and I almost feel like I like this one more than the original T-1000 motorcycle cop version. It's a good excuse to repaint the figure, and toy companies are always looking for ways to reuse a mold. I mean, that's the whole purpose of it. If you can get more use out of one mold, it means more figures. And while some are simple cash grabs, I think, on repaints, this is one repaint I actually really like. Some of the things I don't like, still his pre-posed knees are always a big issue, pre-posed legs. And also this little flecks, that's the little speckles of white that are coming off as you hold the figure. Those are little, I don't want to say small gripes, the knee problem is still a big thing for me. But I'm happy with this figure. I am happy. And I'm usually one to argue a point that a repaint is not necessary unless you can justify the reasoning for it. This figure is a good argument as to why a repaint can work. And for that reason, the T-1000 liquid nitrogen version, I'm going to actually give him an 8. Today's Toy Spot, we're having a look at the NECA Terminator 2 figures, and we're looking today at the T-1000 liquid nitrogen. Thanks for watching, guys. See you next time.